Well, I knew Jim way back. I mean, when I worked at the BBC in the 40s, I mean, he used to broadcast for me, and my wife and I visited him in Blackheath, and I knew him not from the very beginning, because he was elected in 45, and I didn't get in until 50, but I got to know him in the late 40s, and then, of course, I was in the cabinet, the last cabinet, the only cabinet that he presided over from 76 to 79, and the thing about Jim was, first of all, he's a very nice guy. I liked him very much indeed, and a while back when my wife was dying, he sent me a message, and I wrote to him last week about the death of Audrey, and I'm just very fond of the man. He had an impossible position because he didn't have a majority from the time he became Prime Minister until the 1979 election. The conventional wisdom, which you've reflected in the bulletin, was the unions brought him down. I don't agree with that. I think the International Monetary Fund forced the cabinet to make quite unnecessary cuts because the oil was bubbling ashore. We didn't need to make them, but the cabinet took that view, and that made the conflict with the public service unions almost inevitable. But, you know, when you look back on a political life, he was a real Labour man. He was on the right of the party, but he appointed people like myself who took a contrary view on many issues and wanted to work properly. And the cabinet, you know, we used to have long meetings of the cabinet in order to discuss things, and Jim always allowed the opposite view to be put forward, and then there to be a consideration and then a decision, and it was a very collective type of decision making. Now, I really love the man. I'm really sorry that he's died. 93 is not a bad age, but it's a loss for the Labour movement.
Everyone we've been speaking to has spoken about his light touch as a manager, Lord Owen, saying that he was very much given a long rein to sort of take his own decisions as well. Is that how you recall him as well?
He did allow discussion, and for example on the IMF I put forward an alternative economic strategy, so he said, right, the first cabinet will consider Tony's proposals, and the whole cabinet was devoted to what I proposed. It was turned down, and then we went along in the end with the cuts, which he thought were necessary, and I have no complaint. And then at the end, when he announced the decision, he said, we did consider all alternatives, and this was the view we took, which was factually correct. I've always had I had a lot of affection for Jim, genuine affection, and I think he will be looked back on as a man who did his best, a decent guy who did his best in extremely difficult circumstances, and his enemies were not the trade union movement, but the IMF that decided to bring down the Labour government and replace it with Mrs. Thatcher. That's my opinion, and I think it's time that view was considered as an alternative to the view that he was down by the unions.
OK, and just briefly, Tony Benn, I mean, he was the last of the old Labour Prime Ministers. Do you think it was a source of great unhappiness to him what happened to the Labour Party and the infighting in the subsequent years?
Well, he wasn't a new Labour. I mean, he made it absolutely clear he wasn't in any way a new Labour man. But, I mean, he took a view about the arguments that were going on, and you'd expect him to do so. I'm rather in favour of people saying what they mean, meaning what they say, and doing what they said they'd do, and that was true of him. He was straight. I mean, no spin doctors could alter Jim's view, and they say you knew where you were with the guy, and that's why I liked him.